All kinds of things going on in Florida. Arizona looks like it's over. The Democrat will win, and she is crazy as the ant in the attic. She's an absolute left-wing kook. But it's harder and harder to tell her apart from other left-wing kooks that are getting elected now. They did play tricks. These emergency voting centers, have you heard about them? In Florida, you have these ballots people cast, and they cast these ballots because, you know, they can't tell right there if somebody is who they say they are, if they don't have the appropriate identification with them. They call them provisional ballots, and more what the Democrats do in these Democrat counties, and they quickly mix them with the other ballots, and you can't tell them apart one from the other. And in Georgia, they're trying to steal that governor's race there, too. But the first thing I want to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, is the nature of the media and the Democrats, and we have to go back to this. I've got page after page of clip after clip of what took place over the last 2 days on television. The things that the Democrats say, the things that the media say, the things that the media guests and contributors say, they are so outrageous. So outrageous. And you know me, I try to get to the bottom of these things. What is going on here? And what is going on here is that in the 1960s and 70s and the early 80s, the media decided that it wasn't enough to report the news. This has been documented. And they let you interpret it. That they were going to report, quote unquote, the news and interpret it. And not only were they going to interpret it, they were going to interpret it from a liberal perspective. And so that's what you see. The media is part of this entire progressive movement that has devoured really all of our institutions. Many of you, your synagogues and churches, our entertainment, even late at night. You see it. Academia is now all for one and one for all. And the media. And the media. This is why you're frustrated. But editors and publishers, and they spoke about it and they wrote about it openly, in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, decided that they were going to advance what they call liberal values, but what it is left-wing bias. And they're doing it, and they're doing a lot of it. Now, I've heard interpretations of this election that it's we've lost the suburbs because of Trump. We've lost the suburbs because of Trump. That's not why we lost the suburbs. We've lost the suburbs because of single white women. That's not why we lost the suburbs. We lost the suburbs because of married white women. These are all the argument. That's not why we lost the suburbs. What's happening are the metropolitan areas are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You have public transportation moving further and further out into these suburbs and outer suburban areas. But the real reason is immigration. Now, I must say, I am so busy with LEVIN TV and Fox and writing my next book, I don't have the chance to listen to talk radio anymore. I really don't. Unless it's about a half hour before I go on the air. So I don't know what everybody else is doing. But I had a lot of back and forth with a couple of my talk radio buddies, and maybe they raised this. I don't know. But in that back and forth, we discussed, and I raised as well, I live in a state, Virginia. Virginia, that 10 years ago was a solid red state. It's now a blue state. In 10 years. Colorado, 10 years ago, was a solid red state. It's a blue state. Arizona was a solid red state. It's now a purple state. And by the way, the reason we lost Arizona was not only because of these emergency voting centers that they set up before the election, which is a real farce, but because Martha McSally failed to build bridges to conservatives after a vicious primary fight. So Arizona's a little different. But still, immigration has hugely affected that state. Florida is very, very close. Why? Immigration. California, which Ronald Reagan not only won twice in a landslide, but George H.W. Bush won in a landslide. Did you know that? California's gone. It's a dark blue, one-party state. And they knocked out 3 or 4 more Republicans along the way. Because of changing demographics, because of immigration, not because of Trump. Not because of women in the suburbs or anything of the kind. And it's interesting that almost none of the media analysis, quote unquote, in the big media mentions immigration. And yet that's what's doing it. And people have written about this over the years. They've talked about what's coming, and it's come. And here it is. Many of you are old enough to remember. Some of you are not. Reagan won his first race in a landslide. He won his second race in a landslide. George H.W. Bush won very comfortably in the next race against Dukakis. The talk back then was, how will the Democrats ever win the presidency? How will they ever win the presidency? They can't win the popular vote, and they can't win the Electoral College. The Republicans, as long as they keep winning California, Texas, and Florida, as well as Colorado and the South, there's simply no way that the Democrats can win. So what did they do? They changed a number of the states, and they're changing a number of the states. That is why they will fight to the bitter end to secure against securing the southern border. Wall, fence, moat, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They will fight to the bitter end. That is why there are at least 500 sanctuary cities in this country. 500, which are illegal. This nullification of federal law. That is why, when Obama was president, they stuffed the courts. They packed the courts with the most radical Democrats they possibly could. At the district court and circuit levels, in particular, because they knew that's where most of these cases would be heard. And that's where most of the cases involving immigration are heard. And so this is the problem. And way back when, during so-called comprehensive immigration reform, when George Bush was pushing it, I believe it was 2006, 2007, I spoke at great length on this program. Great length on this program. That the clock was ticking. This isn't about brown people, yellow people, white people, red people, albino people, whatever. This is about reality, and you're seeing it. Because without assimilation, and this really is the first period in American history, I'd say the last 30 to 40 years, that we've had immigration without assimilation. And without assimilation, people coming to this country have no connection to this country. People coming to this country have no connection to the American culture. That is why you keep hearing Democrats and the media, and they're one and the same, keep accusing anybody who talks about securing the border or ensuring that our voting lists are correct or anything like that as being racist. Racist. Because balkanization, tribalization, diversity of cultures is exactly what they want. That's the name of the Democrat Party. It cobbles together these coalitions. It doesn't want assimilation. It needs us at each other's throats. That's the problem our country faces. Not Donald Trump. Not Donald Trump's tweets. And the truth is, if Jeb Bush were president, or one of these other guys was president, we'd be in a worse position today. Worse. Than we are right now. It is very superficial. It's very easy to just keep dumping on, well, if Trump did this, and Trump did this, the suburbs this, and the inner suburbs, and the... It's not correct. It's knee-jerk. The population is changing. And that is why you keep hearing the race baiting. That is why you keep hearing a white privilege and white supremacy from the left. That is why you keep hearing the most outrageous things from the left, to try and prevent the discussion that I'm having now with you for the last 20 minutes. They don't want it. That is why the media doesn't talk about it. But it's happening right in front of your face. I'll be right back. I sent an article to a buddy of mine also in this business, and it was an article about how in Texas we have a big problem. Governor Abbott is a great governor. He only got 55% of the vote, folks. Ted Cruz got a little over 51% of the vote. Cruz had $80 million spent against him. So even today, I heard on our favorite cable channel, he was a terrible candidate, Cruz. No, he wasn't. $80 million is a lot of money. I think he raised about $25 million, which should have been plenty. There are 14 appellate courts in Texas. The vast majority have had majority Republicans on them. Now, 7 have Democrats and 7 have Republicans. The metropolitan areas in Texas, in the cities and the immediate suburbs, are all Democrat. Fort Worth was the last holdout, and Fort Worth went Democrat slightly this last election. This has nothing to do with suburban white women. Immigration. The fact that the Democrats own California has nothing to do with suburban white women. They've been owning it now for years, and it's getting worse. Immigration. And you also have migration within the United States. So you have immigration, and you also have migration. This is an important second part of it. You have individuals in population centers like New York City or Philadelphia or Baltimore and so forth, many of whom are Democrats. And then they move, or Washington, D.C., Chicago, then they move into the immediate suburbs. And they continue their voting patterns, even though they're escaping these particular areas, presumably for a better life or a different life. But they bring their same voting habits. Hardcore Democrats in New York moving to Florida. Hardcore Democrats in Washington, D.C. moving to Virginia. Or hardcore Democrats in Maryland moving to Virginia. Not everybody, but you know what I mean. Hardcore Democrats in Chicago moving to the suburbs in the immediate area around Chicago. So you have these two forces. You have immigration, and then you have migration within the United States. And that's what's happening to these red states. It can't go on much longer until it's the Republicans who have no way to victory on a presidential election. And I'm quite serious about that. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm just telling you, we had control of the House and the Senate. And because many of the people who lost in the House, many of the rhinos this last election, wouldn't step up on immigration, we never got our wall. I'll be back. This was all predictable. The Bush administration, Karl Rove, the Republican House that was, just wouldn't do anything about it. I wrote Liberty and Tyranny in 2008. That's 10 years ago. And I talked about how the 14th Amendment does not provide birthright citizenship and so forth. And I laid out all these issues, and I concluded the combination of intended and unintended consequences and legal and illegal immigration is transforming American society. 10 years ago. Using the U.S. Census Bureau's data collected in March 2007, the Center for Immigration Studies reported the nation's immigration population, legal and illegal, reached a record 37.9 million in 2007. It's much worse today. Immigrants account for 1 in 8 U.S. residents. It's higher now. But that was the highest level in 80 years. In 1970, it was 1 in 21. In 1980, it was 1 in 16. In 1990, it was 1 in 13. And today I wrote this, it's 1 in 8. And today I bet it's 1 in 6. Overall, nearly 1 in 3 immigrants is an illegal alien. Half of Mexican and Central American immigrants and 1/3 of South American immigrants are illegal in the United States. Of adult immigrants, 31%, this is 11-year-old statistics. 31% have not completed high school compared to 8% of Native Americans. Since 2000, immigration increased the number of workers without a high school diploma by 14% and all other workers by 3%. The proportion of immigrant-headed households using at least one major welfare program is 33%. It's higher now, compared to just 19% of Native American households. The poverty rate for immigrants and their U.S.-born children under 18 is 17%, nearly 50% higher than the rate for Native Americans and their children. Immigration accounts for virtually all of the national increase in public school enrollment over the last 20 years. In 2007, there were 10.8 million school-age children from immigrant families in the United States. Now it's far more. The Pew Hispanic Center, again, this is 2004, estimates that 9% of the population of Mexico was living in the United States in 2004. 57% of all illegal immigrants are Mexican. Another 24% are from other Latin American countries. 55% of all Mexicans in the United States are here illegally. By 2050, Hispanics will be between 29% and 32% of the nation's population. Washington Post columnist Robert J. Samuelson, again, this is from Liberty and Tyranny 10 years ago, analyzed the Census Bureau's annual statistical report on poverty and housing and household income from 2006 and found, among other things, that there were 36.5 million people in poverty. I'm quoting him. That's the figure that translates into 12.3% poverty rate. In 1990, the population was smaller, and there were 33.6 million people in poverty, a rate of 13.5%. The increase from 1990 to 2009 was 2.9 million people. That is, Hispanics, he writes, accounted for the entire gain of the increase in poverty in the United States. He's talking about immigration. Now, if you were to go through these statistics that Robert Samuelson, a columnist for the Washington Post, went through back then today on any of these cable channels, that is CNN, MSNBC, you would be accused of being a white supremacist or a racist. Samuelson explained that from 1990 to 2006, the number of poor Hispanics increased 3.2 million, from 6 million to 9.2 million. Meanwhile, the number of non-Hispanic whites in poverty fell from 16.6 million in 1990 to 16 million in 2006. Among blacks, there was a decline from 9.8 million in 1990 to 9 million in 2006. White and black poverty have risen somewhat since 2000, but it is down over the longer periods. He said only an act of willful denial can separate immigration and poverty. It's incredible. This is all in the book. It goes on much further. Rather than Americanize aliens and use public and private institutions to inculcate them with the virtues of American culture, language, mores, history, traditions, and customs, the status is cultivating a cultural relativism in which the cultures from which the aliens fled are given equal accord with the American culture. You saw them do that a couple months ago with Trump. But all cultures are not equal, as evidenced in part by the alien fleeing his own country for the American culture, and the American citizen staying put. It is normal and healthy for ethnic groups to celebrate their diverse heritage, Columbus Day, St. Patrick's Day, etc., and they have since the nation's founding. Most large cities have a Chinatown, a Little Italy, a Germantown. In many of these ethnic neighborhoods, the old language is still spoken, especially among the older generations. But neither the heritage nor home language of the individual has ever competed with the American culture for dominance. The history of immigration in the United States up to now has been the history of assimilation. George Washington in his farewell address, 1796. Am I boring everybody? You want me just to attack Trump and white women? Quote, citizens, either by birth or choice, of a common country, that country has the right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. Assimilation. Assimilation. For more than 2 centuries, individuals with diverse backgrounds have come together to form a national melting pot, an harmonious society sustained by allegiance to the country and its founding principles. But today's open-ended mass migration, coupled with the destructive influences of biculturalism, multiculturalism, bilingualism, multilingualism, dual citizenship, and affirmative action, have combined to form the building blocks of a different kind of society, where aliens are taught to hold tightly to their former cultures and languages. Balkanization grows, antagonism and conflict are aroused, and victimhood is claimed at perceived slights. If a nation does not show and teach respect for its own identity, principles, and institutions, that corrosive attitude is conveyed to the rest of the world, including newly arriving aliens. And if this is unchecked, the nation will ultimately cease to exist. Dr. Samuel Huntington, the late Dr. Samuel Huntington, served as chairman of Harvard's Government Department and its Academy for International Area Studies. He wrote, the persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into 2 peoples, 2 cultures, and 2 languages. The United States ignores this challenge at its peril. It's because of the lack of assimilation, not because these folks are Hispanic, by the way. He argued that Mexican immigration differs from past immigration and most other contemporary immigration due to a combination of 6 factors: scale, illegality, regional concentration in the Southwest, contiguity, persistence, and historical presence. The consequences, he believed, are stark. Demographically, socially, and culturally, this is him. The reconquista, that is, the reconquest of the Southwest United States by Mexican immigrants, is well underway. Can you imagine a man from Harvard writing this today? He wrote this in 2006. Can you imagine? It'd be beating on his door and writing things on his driveway. Besides, how can an alien participate fully in American society if he does not share the language that binds citizen to citizen? How can he acquire better skills, pursue higher learning, or interact effectively in the marketplace if he doesn't speak English? How can he assess the benefit of entering into contracts or other legal arrangements if he cannot understand the terms and conditions to which he commits himself? And most important, how can the alien comprehend the nation's founding principles and pledge allegiance to them if he cannot be sure of their intended consequences and meaning? And yet, we have the Democrat Party and these various ethnic front groups, don't we? Yes, we do. And they do not want unity, these political forces, because unity undermines their power. And apparently unity undermines CNN and MSNBC. And so they engage in practice on these networks that are intended to proscribe debate. As I wrote 10 years ago, those who dissent from his immigration policies, that is, of the statists, are often characterized as exclusionists, nativists, xenophobes, or even racists. The neo-statist offers no alternative to the status quo and condemns the conservative for not going along. He not only accommodates balkanization, this is most of your Republican friends, but panders to it. But the good citizen contributes to the social cohesion of the civil society for his own benefit and the benefit of that society, and he expects his government to do the same. The conservative believes that to the extent immigration can be applied to that purpose, it's desirable. When it does not, it is destructive of those ends. And unless we address this, and it looks like it's not possible given who controls the House now, and apparently wasn't possible when the Republicans controlled the House because about 40 or 50 of them had absolutely no interest in securing the border. Many of them lost their races this time around. It's going to become increasingly difficult to win the presidency. Now, the never-Trumpers and the more, what should I say, and the never-Trumpers who claim now not to be never-Trumpers, they'll never admit this. It's got to be Trump. He's turning people off. It's got to be Trump. He's turning people off. Has it ever occurred to them that he may actually be speaking the truth many times? Like on this issue? Whereas other Republicans don't have the guts to do so? So this has had the biggest influence on the midterm elections. This has had the biggest influence on the nature of this society. And it's going to continue. And you can hear it. The language that's being used by politicians, by people in the media, the violence that you see rising up. The nation is divided, very badly divided. And it's only going to get worse. Nationalism. I've discussed this probably more than anybody. I've written about it more than anybody. The alternative to me is Americanism. And the reason, in part, is because of the confusion about what nationalism means. The founders of this country and the framers of the Constitution were very concerned about and skeptical of nationalism. They created a national government, but they insisted on federalism, limiting the power of the national government. When you say things like nationalism, you're saying things that progressives said at the turn of the last century. I've told you before. Theodore Roosevelt gave this big speech that was hugely popular back then called the New Nationalism. And you're also sounding like neocons. Well, what do you mean by that, Mark? I actually went back to the beginning of Liberty and Tyranny because I had recollected writing this. And here's what I wrote. Columnists William Crystal and David Brooks, Brooks now, of course, with the New York Times, and Crystal with himself, promote something called national greatness conservatism. National greatness conservatism. That's what they said. They co-authored an opinion piece in which they exclaimed that it does not despise government. How could it? This is them. How can Americans love their nation if they hate its government? But the way to restore faith in our government is to slash its flabbiness while making it more effective, unquote. So Bill Kristol, a never-Trumper dead-ender, and David Brooks, whatever he is, they first coined the phrase national greatness conservatism. And I rejected it. I said the conservative does not despise government. He despises tyranny. This is precisely why the conservative reveres the Constitution and insists on adherence to it. An effective government that operates outside its constitutional limits is a dangerous government. So, we constitutional conservatives are not nationalists. We don't embrace nationalism. We embrace Americanism. That is, our founding principles, as stated best and concisely in the Declaration, and our Constitution. That's why I call us constitutional conservatives. And my book, Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism, lays it all out. I'm not hawking the book. By the way, I have something to mention next hour. I hope you'll stay with me, particularly at the top of the hour, involving the New York Times. Yes, the Holocaust-denying New York Times. I think you're going to want to hear it. We've got a hell of a lot more to cover, too. I'll be right back.